Welcome to Cyber Focus from the McCrary Institute, where we explore the people and ideas shaping and defending our digital world. I'm your host, Frank Cilluffo, and have the privilege this week to sit down with two luminaries in the cyber field. Dave DeWalt, who is the founder and CEO of NightDragon, has been a CEO of multiple cybersecurity companies in the past, including, as my kids would say, the OG, McAfee, which ultimately was sold to Intel. And I can't count how many executives came out of that leadership team, as well as FireEye, and is a noted wrestler. Hopefully we'll get to some insights that he learned on the mat that he can bring to the boardroom. And also Katherine Gronberg, who is a longtime friend. She runs government affairs at NightDragon, has run government affairs for CrowdStrike, Forescout, and if I'm not mistaken, Katherine, I think we first met when you worked for Senator Judd Gregg on the Appropriations Committee.
I guarantee it.
Really excited about today's conversation. And Dave, Katherine, I thought we'd start. This is a little different, so we've gone deep in a lot of issues around cyber. What I thought we could do is maybe start going wide in terms of where we see some of the technical innovations coming. Obviously, a little bit of your investment thesis in terms of what NightDragon is looking at, and sort of roll from there. So
I thought we were going to arm wrestle first. You said about wrestling.
I don't wrestle with wrestlers, so I learned that
good, Frank.
I'm smart enough to figure that one out. I'm not very smart, but that one I can figure out. So, Dave, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having us. Really appreciate it, and what a great venue you have here. Appreciate it. Great to have Katherine with me too. Awesome.
Well, so tell me, what do you think some of the when we look at the tech landscape and lots of buzzwords, AI, ML, quantum, all of which matter, but what really matters from your perspective?
I'll start, Katherine, add on. I've been talking, Frank, for the last 20 years, literally. You mentioned McAfee OG, but for 20 years watching this market grow, and I called it the perfect cyberstorm 20 years ago because you had these confluences coming together. And here we are 20 years later, these confluences are even bigger. And so you think about technology inertia, right? I was like, the faster technology goes, the less we harden that technology, because the race for capitalism creates this opportunity, but yet we don't really secure by design much, so therefore there's a lot of vulnerabilities. The vulnerabilities then create a big attack surface. The big attack surface creates more and more attackers, and we've grown in every one of those areas. Then throw geopolitical tensions on top of it, anonymity on the internet.
Big storm.
And we have a storm, right? And just over the last 2 decades, every one of those confluences got almost exponentially worse. And you have all these revolutionary kind of attacks. The internet comes along, mobile computing comes along, and now we have AI and quantum you mentioned as well. And you put that all together, it's an interesting world. And last thing I would say is I talk about this fusion, and to your point of what's interesting, we focus at NightDragon Investment Advisory on these 5 domains, right? There's 5 battlegrounds really in the world, space, air, oceans,
I want
land.
to talk space. So,
and then cyber, right? So 5 domains, but what's happened is they're all fusing, right? So we now have cyber threats in space. We have threats in the air, oceans, land, and it's all kind of coming together, whereas we used to have different, almost bowling alleys, so to speak, of each of the domains. So it's crossing over, it's getting more and more difficult. And then, of course, this year, 60 countries have elections, so that keeps it interesting too, with misinformation, disinformation. So a lot there, but may we live in interesting times, I always say, and boy, do we have interesting times.
And I'm glad they're interesting people doing interesting things to try to ameliorate the risk. I don't think we'll ever say game over, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's a journey, exactly. And I do want to pull the thread, because I do think space and cyber are very applicable. They transcend all domains, air, land, sea, space in cyber's respect, and air, land, sea, cyber in space's perspective. And I do think it's that convergence point where we're going to see greatest opportunities and also the greatest risk. And just curious in terms of an AI, ML, those are enablers to all of those domains as well, right? When you look at sort of an investment, what are you looking for the team? Are you looking for a technology? What differentiates NightDragon from others in the space?
Wow, I'll take the next 28 minutes for this one, sorry. But we look for, inherently we have a motto, secure our world for tomorrow. So, it's a big mission statement, but the idea behind it is we look for the biggest threats, the biggest risks that we see on the planet across all 5 domains. And then we look for technology that can scale to meet that risk. I saw that when I was first looking at FireEye, for example. When I became CEO there, I never heard of FireEye. It was like, what's a virtual machine in the network kind of thing. But because we could detonate kind of executables in the network, we were able to see malicious attempts occurring. Nobody else could quite see it. It was solving a major threat or risk. So we look for that kind of technology as much as we can, and then we apply it from an operational standpoint. So think very strategic threats and risks, make investments, and then be good operators helping our partners grow their business. So we're very domain specific. We call it security tech. And we want to be a great operating partner to help with government activities, help with partnering, go-to-market activities, help with marketing, sales, research and development, all the areas, because we're operators ourselves. And so the more we can help them be deep in our sector, the better success we're going to have in what we're doing. So that's what we are, strategic operating investors.
And more mid to late stage?
More mid to late, so growth and beyond. 20 million of revenue is where we like to start, as opposed to the early stage where the tech risk is still a little higher. And you kind of mentioned 2 of the 3 T's that I like to talk about, team, tech, and TAM. So we look for a really big total addressable market where a big threat is occurring. We then look for technology that can scale to meet that opportunity, and then we really look for a team, and especially a team that has mission in their mind, right? So that's why we love the DC area and the military backgrounds, intelligence backgrounds, and the more mission they are, the more we're able to partner with government, the more we're able to partner with global governments, the more we're able to really bring them into the mainstream and trust. And so that's our little MO, get the team right, get the tech right, get the TAM right.
It's a great 3 T's. That's something even I can remember, which is good. Katherine, I mean, perfect segue to sort of talk a little bit about government sector in particular. And I mean, this may be a little Pollyannish, but cybersecurity is a team sport. It's one team, one fight, public-private, so crucial. What are your thoughts along those lines?
Well, following up a little bit on what Dave said, kind of my role at NightDragon is very much on the operational side. It's to really help our companies fulfill that mission of providing their, we think, awesome capabilities to the government. And really, when you join the portfolio, it's if you're not already doing that, it's an expectation that we then would help you with. Many of the companies already are oriented towards government, but a few of them really haven't cracked the nut for a number of reasons. It can be tricky, it's expensive, people don't know how to do it if they haven't come from government, so we could help some of our smaller companies that are haven't yet sold to gov, but have a great technology that they should be. And so the way you could look at it is I love when Dave talks about the portfolio as a whole, because we especially are good at creating synergies between the companies. So for example, some of our companies might be more mature in gov. Maybe they're in existing programs, and there are learnings there that we can cross-pollinate to other companies and even bring them in. And then from the perspective of thinking beyond just cybersecurity, because the world isn't really only anymore just about like cyber threat intelligence, it's also about real world threat intelligence. It's seeing even beyond the synergies that exist for network security. It's actually seeing how data can be fused. I mean, really even kind of within the platform, we're creating these relationships where it's better together. We're taking technologies that relate, for example, to like bot intelligence and then what would traditionally be considered threat intelligence and trying to get them to integrate and to work together. And those are really interesting conversations to the government, because as you know, they are also trying to figure out how to sort of up-level the game in terms of thinking about how we use intelligence and get smarter about it. especially when you have AI capabilities that let the government sort of, look at larger fields of data to collect and sort of synthesize that intelligence. So that's another thing. Another thing we bring, which I think is really cool because it allows me to marry up kind of different aspects of my career, is the way we help our companies work with and integrate with systems integrators or larger, defense contractors, and then some of the really key distributors here. People don't really understand that there's this large ecosystem that you can't operate independently. You said it takes a village, it's a team sport. Well, we have to work with bigger companies. We help integrate smaller technologies. And that's really the fun of being at NightDragon. Our vision always goes just beyond the one company we're investing in at the time. It's how they fit into the bigger ecosystem.
Which
Katherine's amazing at helping our companies on this, and I give her a lot of credit for it. We've had this playbook, almost this like operational playbook that partners with the government to partner with the industry. So we start with the government and thinking about what we can do to partner, not just with policy, but also with programs and various types of playbooks with the government, but then ultimately the critical infrastructures that they govern as well. Mm-hmm. So if you can do that right as an investor or advisor, it can create a very powerful multiplier in the effect of, and as you know, that playbook is hard to do, but those who know it, like Katherine, can really create a lot of value add for our customers.
Not to steal our own thunder, but we're going to be coming out with the transition task force and priorities for the next administration. It will be a new administration one way or the other, and one of the items we're looking at is playbooks in terms of responding to particular actors and to know what their pain points are and to know how we would respond and respond in kind. So you're preaching to the choir here, and easier said than done because you have to have the political will and do the reps, right? It's like going to the gym. You can't just suddenly go into game day without all the blood, sweat, and tears to get to that point. So.
What's really interesting about the process that you're talking about and trying to inform a new administration, but also looking at this administration has been prolific in terms of many of the things that they've been EOs and is helping companies that may not be huge with a ton of people to look at these things, understand how they impact their mission and how they sell to the government and how they can meet some of the missions created by those very policy directives. That's something that's really missing. And that goes not just for governments consuming technologies, but it's also, for example, how a bank would take a technology in and leverage it per a directive or a recommendation out of NIST. There's a lot of space that's created for organizations like yours that are synthesizing and explaining what these things mean. There's examples all the time of, the executive order with Section 4 and a number of software provisions had the effect of spurring innovation in that exact area. And that, of course, I believe, was by design. But we can then see companies coming up into the market that might be ready at some point to scale to gov. And we can sort of flag those early because we have the bird's eye view into how industry is responding, sometimes not even really directly knowing. And you can say to government friends, like, those technologies are on the way. Here's what they look like today. And so that's a really cool thing that we can do in our partnerships with government.
And we had Chris Inglis on in our very first episode when the strategy came out in terms of burden sharing and not. The reality is ransomware has democratized the cyber threat and cyber risk. Everyone is a target, from the biggest companies down to the smallest companies. And the reality is not everyone has the resources, the wherewithal, nor the time and effort. They didn't go into business thinking they had to defend themselves against the Russian intelligence service or the Chinese military or North Korean government hackers. But that is the world we live in, and it's this need to bring some of the different actors together that I think is important. But the reality is we don't fully have visibility, do we? And maybe that is the starting point, because it's not just the zeros and ones in the traditional sense. It's physical cyber's converging pretty fast, isn't it?
Yeah, I believe so. I see and have been speaking about cyber physical convergence for a couple of years now. And we started to see signs of that with NotPetya and WannaCry, and like, wow, we suddenly had a cyber vulnerability bring down the world's
OT,
supply chain and operational technologies in a way that we just didn't realize what a connected world we have. You fast forward now, we're seeing, I mean, it could be a hurricane, it could be an active shooter, it could be a physical event that ultimately has an effect on a data center or has an effect on some operation. So if we don't map our physical assets to our cyber assets, we're not doing a playbook for resiliency.
Exactly.
And that's really the word now we need is resiliency.
And that's well said. And yet, not many companies have converged their IT/OT in a combined SOC to get that visibility and more strategically to really look at it holistically. But that's kind of where we need to go, isn't it?
I believe so. I look at, we've had a number of companies in the OT space for years, and when I was even back as CEO of McAfee, I bought a company that helped at OT security. I could see this coming. And then when I was at Mandiant and FireEye, we did a lot of OT incident response. I mean, this threat's coming, and the threat to the OT ICS world is much greater with kinetic ramifications than potentially the cyberspace even. But you start to put ransomware together, accidents that can occur, and then you put all this lack of air gapping we have a problem with. We're vulnerable, and
We're seeing that play out in Ukraine. Well-placed bombs can have kinetic attacks on cyber infrastructure. Vice versa can have significant effect.
True.
Katherine, In-Q-Tel, what are your thoughts there? Because truth is I was a huge proponent when Ruth David stood it up, and big fan of what they've done. Is that a model that's working in your eyes?
I mean, I think so. I mean, I don't have the academic study on it, but we have real-world experience working with companies that come out of In-Q-Tel. And in general, I think it's a great concept. The government should absolutely be in early stage technology because that's maybe a little bit less so than when it was started. There is much more private capital available for these sort of newer, younger defense tech ideas. But I think when it started, it wasn't the case. So now it's more of a nice combo, but it absolutely still has a role to play. And we enjoy seeing, that's our pipeline, seeing companies come out of an In-Q-Tel. Yeah, them and others. There's a few other like defense type incubators that are either not for profits or actually sort of DoD sort of sponsored. Some of the services have their own houses that are working on early stage software technologies. So it's a little bit more of an ecosystem than just In-Q-Tel, but they were really pioneers. I would say we like to think of ourselves as sort of filling in the really important gap that comes after, because companies that come out of In-Q-Tel, they then have to, if they're successful, which they have the support of In-Q-Tel, and that I really think that's invaluable. It should be said. If I didn't say that directly, it's very invaluable. We can catch them and see them through their growth phase. And why is that important? I think that's important because people very often talk about the difficulty of scaling that technology to actual production, especially a DoD. Like they're sort of as a common topic of conversation is the Valley of Death, and how we actually take these technologies that just have had pilots or SBIRs, those are small business contracts, into ideally everybody would want enterprise level deployment. That's why they're investing their dollars, is to get to that level. And so we have a special place in that chain too. So we see all those early stage efforts as being very interesting and valuable, and we try to stay close to them.
Can I do a quick shout out?
Absolutely.
I mean, I've watched In-Q-Tel under Chris Darby and Steve Bauscher for years. They were an investor into FireEye very early on. And to watch the progress they've made, to watch the impact that they've had, it's a real shout out. And you can see it now. I go to the In-Q-Tel conferences in Palm Springs. The number of companies, the community they've created, the collaboration with the community they've created, it's come a long way. Now, having said that, we still have a long way to go.
Absolutely.
This isn't an In-Q-Tel thing, but when you look at DIU, you look at DARPA, you look at Red Cell and some of the others, and Data Tribes, we have a few of these EIR, like programs, entrepreneur in residence programs, and ways to build, but we need more of that. And for an investor who's gone to Israel for 25 years, and I watched the ecosystem in Israel, the education system, the innovation system, the connection from higher education to innovation, the entrepreneur model, the early stage capital. I mean, this is a well-oiled machine there that we aren't quite well-oiled yet, and we have more work to do.
And I'm definitely going to pull the thread on Israel and other small countries that punch well above their weight. I put Estonia there. I put Singapore. They all live in tough neighborhoods. There might be a reason they don't have a choice but to do it well. Like
another
Israel.
one is India coming as well. There's now
not so small, but
so small, but another country. They've developed 300 cyber companies in the last 4 years, several unicorns. A lot of reverse immigrations occurred during COVID, and you're now starting to watch an India ecosystem rise up because they have the institutions and education and the experience too. So it's interesting to watch.
This
the
is
world.
worthy of a full conversation around India because why is it an emerging massive market? Hasn't done, but if you look at the executives in the United States, a huge percentage come from India and are educated in India, and I think in time it's going to be homegrown as well. But before we sort of jump into that, because I do want to sort of talk the global market as much as we can and some of the challenges for doing business with U.S. government, given CFIUS and some significant supply chain related issues. But on the public-private, anything when starting, now you guys are mid-stage, so it's maybe a little different, but when you start a company, very different than if you're going to serve government than industry, right? And I'd be curious what you think some of those telltale playbook, what are the first three things? And I'm not going to make you list the three.
We have a really long checklist, actually.
She does. It's like
okay.
30 pages
Good.
long.
Good.
Well, we have to really assess because as we've grown, especially we're adding companies all the time. Some are cyber, some are data, some are real world sort of intelligence. But we do have a really long checklist to assess maturity. We call it sort of it's a maturity assessment to know how our companies are ready to go to gov and to try to make sure that we are helping them in areas where they're not. And a big area, you would have to, I think it's where people start because it makes them most nervous is all of the requirements, right? If you're a cloud company, you have to comply with FedRAMP. If you're any defense company, you have to comply with 800-171 and soon CMMC. There's beyond that, there's now the new requirements for software code validation and determining whether you're providing something that's deemed critical software. There's a patchwork quilt of those things. And I think the key thing is not to be afraid of them, but also to see that, requirements like that can be your friend. There's a bunch of other areas. Sometimes it's just finding a team that knows how to sell to gov, because the same people that are selling to your commercial companies are probably not going to do that well when they're pitching Department of Energy. Maybe they can't even get in the building, right? So there's all these considerations. There's also, and this is kind of a favorite of mine, is how you market. I mean, you think you can take your decks and your pitches that are for private sector buyers, and they have to be changed. And the other thing is, in gov, you really have to create, especially because usually there's specific requirements that are lacking, right? The government has to do, hardware asset management and software asset management, all the basics that were in CDM. They have to do EDR now. They have to do certain things per various OMB requirements. But within that, there's not a lot of specificity as to how they should achieve it. And so you're really trying to sort of sell them on the attributes of your product, right? Absolutely. And that's really tricky because buyers in government, as you know, they may not be motivated to buy the most secure, the product that can bring them the most security. They may be going for the lowest cost, right? LPTA. So there's considerations that exist in government that, and not to mention acronyms, that you can't even wrap your head around. And so, that's why we think we provide such great value to the portfolio, because they come up.
Translational, exactly.
Yeah, this sort of basics alone. I'm sure I've missed a bunch, but those are the big ones that I would help our companies with.
We've had a couple of in-depth discussions around Chevron deference and what those implications can be from a regulatory standard perspective. I think it's fair to say that from a government perspective, those will still all be in place. And one thing I just want to foot stomp around In-Q-Tel, and this is what I believe is most successful. It's not the companies themselves. It's the fact that culturally they've been able to build trust. CIA in particular, where its DNA is from, not invented here, is a big issue. Even within that tribe, if you're not part of that exact tribe, you're not necessarily going to get resonance. So I think, to me, that was one of the biggest things to come out of In-Q-Tel's success, is that it has nurtured some trust. And to me, that's takes a long time to build and pretty quick to lose.
Well, not to preach for a second, but when you look at what happened during COVID and that window where so much of our massive talent base disseminated back to countries around the world or was unable to come to the country as part of the changes in travel that occurred, we now have a world that is innovating at a very fast pace outside of America. America needs to become a hub. This isn't just for America born and raised tech companies. This needs to be a world of born and raised coming to America in a way that enables us to control and manage as much of that security infrastructure as we can. And I say control, I'm careful word, but my company FireEye was founded in Pakistan. Not a lot of people know that.
I did not know
the
that.
team, 80 engineers sitting in Lahore, Pakistan. That technology immigrated to America, the team immigrated to America, and it became a great success story in a lot of ways. You look at Palo Alto Networks, in a lot of ways was an Israeli, Nir Zook, and the team there. There is so much goodness around the world that we need gateways to come to America, not just through In-Q-Tel, but through a lot of programs. The better we are at that, the safer we'll all be.
Let's segue into that discussion, looking at the marketplace outside of the United States. And I am worried that at some point we get to the point that there's autocratic regimes and democratic regimes. I think that is the ultimate firewall we still need to keep up. But I'd be curious what some of your thoughts are. Why is Israel, and we've had the Israelis on board, including the former head of 8200 and the national cyber director and others. But I'd be curious what you think some of the success there.
Systemic culture, I'll start with, and education early, military service. Clearly, 18 citizens are part of IDF for a 3-year service. This is a capability that they leverage in an incredible way. It doesn't have to be exactly that model for America to be great at that, but we can be great at it. When you look at America's cyber education system, we don't have much of one, right? And I always compare what Israel's doing with education early and China's now doing with education early. And then I look at America, we're very sporadic. 440 higher education kind of universities in America. How many really have a cyber program with job and innovation as part of that program? A couple of fingers. So if we don't systematize our education into innovation, into job creation, we're going to miss what's an important thing. Now you see pockets, and I'm watching CISA and others looking at this as a big problem, but cyber education, defense, has to happen, right? And it has to happen early and often to get it to a cultural impact.
You're going to make me do my little infomercial here. So the state of Alabama has the first magnet school. I'm a trustee for transparency. It's the Alabama School for Cyber Technology and Engineering. First magnet school at the high school level focused on engineering and cybersecurity.
Love it.
And I got to tell you, these kids are rock stars. Yeah. They're going everywhere, and some are going straight into the marketplace out of high school. They're all the 5-star recruits. All universities are trying to get to them. There is a model. It's just it needs to be replicated.
Scaled.
And we need to scale it on steroids, not slowly, because that is what we're up against.
And here's what's amazing too is it's no longer a technology problem.
At all.
We invested into a company. It was called ThriveDX, not for an infomercial on this, but this came from Israel. They trained the IDF 8200 personnel on it. It's basically creating all kinds of gamification to learning cyber with boot camps and things. And in a 16-week boot camp, we can take a relatively uneducated person into a SOC analyst or a pen tester. So that the tech is there. And with AI now, we can train and teach in a virtual way.
Yep.
How do we make this part of all of our education infrastructure or stuff like it? If we do that, wow, can we fix this?
And I love the gamifying. The reality is there are so many young, incredibly talented women and men in America that are on the sidelines because they may be neurodiverse. You give them a gamified approach to be able to play ball, and they're on the D1.
And reskilling veterans, like the Tech for Vets and Wounded Warrior programs, where now we have education we can bring back to them because they had a mission focus early on.
And scar tissue and experience.
Exactly. And want and desire to help. So we just need the programs put in place to do it, and we have all the pieces. We probably need a leader to drive all this tops down, but it's there.
I think we know what your next gig is, Dave. So please, seriously,
Czar
that is
for cyber education.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Let's go to a current massive incident that occurred not so long ago.
Oh, I didn't notice.
And we'll call it the CrowdStrike Incident, even though it's more broadly impactful. But that should have probably brought up some memories, right? You had your own CrowdStrike moment at McAfee 5958. So I'd be curious what some of your thoughts are there. And quite honestly, you came out of it stronger. So curious what our thinking is there, because I'm going to tell our audience now, like we've said every time, patch, but that doesn't mean it's always going to be the right answer. So, or won't have downstream unintended consequences. But please.
Well, it brought back a lot of memories. I wouldn't say all good. A little PTSD as that day unfolded. So July 18th at about 10 o'clock at night, West Coast time, I started to have my phone lit up, and a lot of activities occurred, reminding me of April 21st, 2010 at 6 a.m. that morning, which was the 5958 issue. So I was CEO of McAfee. We had a faulty DAT release. We called them DATs back then. These are content updates with all the virus protections, similar to the C591 that CrowdStrike sent out erroneously. And so, what are you dealing with here? You're dealing with an incredibly complex environment with these operating systems and things. So 14 years ago when McAfee had its issue, we were able to roll back the content within about 16 minutes.
Wow.
We affected 1,692 companies. So I got 598 and then 5958, and then I have 1,672. And that's how many companies got injured that day by McAfee.
And some were big, right?
Some were very big. One of them was Intel Corporation, who later bought McAfee. But
Boom.
We did our best to recover. Fast forward to July 18th, 2024, CrowdStrike did everything in their powers to recover everybody. This is not for lack of efforts. These accidents will happen. The speed of threats, the speed of risk that's occurring, the complexity of kernel level access to a Microsoft platform is intense, and accidents will occur. Now, having said that, there was a lot of learnings out of this one. I mean, this one affected 30,000 customers directly in minutes. So instead of rolling it out in stages and rings, it was a big bang kind of model. And what did we learn from that?
Massive ripple effect.
It had a massive ripple effect. 694,000 companies ended up being affected by this outage. This was supply chain along with the 30,000 directed. So you had a very big global impact that occurred. But I always say, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? So we need, as a team, public and private, to work together on change, because we don't have a sector regulatory agency governing cyber, right? What do we do to learn from staging, testing, rollback, resiliency for cyber vendors? What do we learn about segmentation of networks so we can roll it into networks easier? all things that just weren't in place even after 14 years from the McAfee event. So we need to learn from this. We never let it happen again. And so like rollback should be mandatory for every cyber vendor, every patch vendor. Rings of staging should be a part of this. So there's inherent like NIST control-like things that need to be in place for cyber vendors and, frankly, IT vendors overall. And I don't want more regulation, but if we don't put this in place, I call it like security by design, not just secure by design, but we need cybersecurity by design. So passionate topic for me, and but I give a lot of kudos to the teams for what they did, best efforts. But having said that, an accident of that proportion cost billions of dollars, and unfortunately it was the case.
And if you think about it, if it were intentional at a time that it could be the first volley or first phase of something more significant, it does show our dependence, and it begs for greater resilience as you double tap.
Well, you think about almost every company has patch management processes, risk quantification around patches, with the exception of the cyber vendors, because we all been taught that these threats are dynamic. So if they need to update every minute or every hour or every day or whatever it is, I'll let them update because I'm safer by being able to update. So they obviate the patch management processes and directly update production systems, servers and workstations all over the architecture, and we've allowed that to occur. So what safety and security do we do to that going forward? Not that we don't want the speed of response for a threat, but we need safe speed and resiliency to that threat.
Absolutely. And again, whether it's solar, wind, just having visibility is sometimes very difficult. Katherine, anything you want to add?
Yeah,
I think we're going to see some changes in government.
I think you probably are. We may have been a little weaker, for example, on the guidance we had coming out relating to updates, right? We was so much focused on software integrity and assurance, which is right, because that's what we learned out of SolarWinds and supply chain, but I think there's going to be more focus on the updating process. I do think what's interesting, if you lift...
And just before, I think I'm correct in saying most DoD systems were not impacted, right, because of some of their testing. Is that fair?
Well, I don't know if it was because of testing, but it also may have been the ubiquity with which some of those products were deployed at DoD, maybe in that case. I also think that the DoD and U.S. civilian agencies are better at knowing where their software is and what's running, and so they're...
might be a little more optimistic than I am.
Some of them are.
Okay.
They've deployed technologies that should have let them know that anyway. But I think if you lift the conversation up a level, and what's great is, I guess, that we have conversations like this with our, sort of these higher order conversations with our government partners. I think that there's, and Dave and I are part of these conversations, there's more ask on industry. And the asks are, hey, could you guys do a better job integrating your products beforehand so that we don't struggle with it when we're putting them together in these programs in DoD and civilian? And so that's kind of an ongoing conversation. But in light of everything that has happened this summer, they will also ask and should ask, well, when you're updating those products, are you going to test them together? And do those testing environments even come close to approximating what my tech stack looks like? And so this is a conversation that I think the government is sort of looking to industry and saying, like, what responsibilities do you have out there before we're installing stuff out here? So I think that these conversations are going to have higher order ramifications for us.
You said something that I don't want to get lost together. The reality is when we look at public-private partnerships, I've long said long on nouns, short on verbs. The reality is it has to be operational collaboration. If you're not practicing together, you ain't going to be a team when it matters.
I think that there's been a lot done in unifying threat intelligence and even in IR. I think we could say that, and it's been coming, but it's been recent. But I also think, this is my opinion, that there probably isn't adequate testing facilities, and that maybe there's more of a thought of there needs to be sort of more robust joint testing capabilities. That comes to mind.
And make the mistakes when it doesn't matter.
And by the way, if I could, this is, again, not a technology problem. We have cyber ranges. We have the ability to test. We have the ability to test together. But we haven't implemented it, right? So we don't have, like, if you think of vendors on one side, customers and critical infrastructure on another. What's in the middle, testing everything on the vendor side to prepare it for customers on the other side? We haven't put the middle thing together. And we've done it from some threat sharing and from some incident response frameworks with the work we've done with JCDC and some of the CSRB efforts that have occurred. But how do we now test better together? I think it's the future, because customers are getting thousands of patches a week. We're going to have more of those problems.
Very well said. And we're close to the end of our time, but I wanted to ask sort of the unfair question. And Yogi Berra once said, the future ain't what it used to be. Where do you see things going right now in terms of not today, but 5-10 years out? Where would, and the best way to predict it, I guess, is to shape it, right? And put the time in to get it done. What does that look like? Because I spend my life thinking about bad people doing bad things and bad country. And it's nice to every once in a while flip it, even if I still have to hit my snooze button and wake up with the same headache one day. But
the quick answer is, on the ominous side for a minute, but now go to the positive side. It's been scary to watch the last couple of years, because the number of threat actors has really risen almost 3-4x. Like, when you have a 3 or 4 times multiplier. When I left FireEye and Mandy in 2018, we tracked 880 bad actor groups. We have 3,500 known groups today, with 3,500 TDPs, with unique fingerprints to what they're doing and attacking. So now you have,
and even APT, those that are even at the highest level of sophistication.
So you have virtual groups now. You have nation state groups. You have proxy groups, and it's an amazing how the actor group has grown. You put money and economics on that, ransomware as a service, and you suddenly have this out of control with very little adjudication of people and retribution of what they're doing. So bad things can happen, and then you put all that motivation of these bad countries with bad leadership. You end up...
Who can use all source, not just cyber means.
So that scares you. On the other hand, I'm also really encouraged by what I'm seeing in AI, like really encouraging, and I'm sure you hear this all the time, but automating, like, for example, automated pen testing. What a concept we had for years. Pen testing was like a bunch of humans coming in to attack a network to kind of see what vulnerability. People did it once a year. Okay, then we do it once a quarter. We have autonomy platforms that do constant pen testing of a system to rid of every vulnerability and self-heal as part of that now. So automation using AI, what's called, these autonomy platforms, are really encouraging to watch, because what we had to do with 100 cyber professionals inside a big company can be done with none. And we can automate this.
Still higher.
Well, we need both, right, at the end of the day. But watching AI and the ability to automate and create faster responses and better intelligence, machine learn, open source intelligence to get everybody helping faster, there's some real promise to what the defense can do here too. So it's going to be a battle.
We can't lose the AI, and quantum can change the whole game, right? But AI, we can't be followers. We have to
be leaders, absolutely, and in the area of quantum too, and the next technologies that coming. I mean, watching what happened with ChatGPT 3 to 4, coming to 5, the speed of this. It's incredible.
And so many other technologies that are incredible. Katherine, anything to add to that? And by the way, we had Phil Venables on not too long ago, who was a huge proponent. I've always thought that the initiative remains with the attacker, but he is all in on blue and the defender. So
I guess I would offer an insight, which is that, at NightDragon we get to sit with these technologies as they're maturing and getting ready to really offer themselves at scale to either companies or the government. And it's pretty cool when you sit there and you're like, wow, like, okay. And you're starting to understand like how it's changing. Technologies like Dave is mentioning are going to just totally shift the landscape for all the existing tools that are already in the environments, and make them better maybe, or make them obsolete.
And obsolete's an important. We have to learn when to let go of technologies. And this is sort of the unfair question, but endpoint, do you see that playing as prominent a role 10 years from now?
I do.
You do?
I mean, I think it's going to diminish a little bit with virtual machines and the way in which we can carry our virtual image around without a computing device in a way and just plug it into anything. But having said that, I mean, we're going to have a lot of endpoints. IoT endpoints. We're going to have SCADA endpoints. Right. There's just too many connections to IP networks today to not have that.
And get close to the data too, though, correct?
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
We'll start with you, Katherine. Last question. What questions didn't I ask that I should have?
You covered so much, Frank. I don't know. Like we could have talked more about PQE. We're going to be working on a project on NStack with post-quantum, and I try to remind people it's not only about encryption, right? We're talking about how quantum technology is just going to, quantum compute is going to change the whole technology landscape. We forget that because we're so focused on how quantum computing is going to bust encryption algorithms. Which is very important.
Keeping secrets and stealing secrets.
I think for me, it's I guess your question to us could have been, and maybe for next time, is what, like, I'm so blessed. I get to be around all the people in government who are doing the coolest things or contemplating the coolest projects, like from, fusing intelligence to, post-quantum. And so I'll say to Dave, like, let me go do that. That's a great learning opportunity. And so, always, if I was on the outside, I would say, what is NightDragon trying to learn about? And so that can be for your next episode.
Let you close it out, Dave. Sort of, what questions didn't I ask? And I love the way that Katherine teed that up in terms of NightDragon.
I'd like to just say thank you. Thank you for hosting us, and thank you for the content you provide here. It's incredible, and I just say what an honor. I've had a chance to serve 4 administrations now, been involved with this community for 20 years, and to watch the village that's getting created and people working together. This is a team sport, cyber. It's a team sport, across the world, and the more we work together, the better. A big shout out to our leadership in government. The cyber leadership's been amazing, watching the work Jen Easterly does and Ann Newberger does. And I think you have David Lubin coming. You've got, everybody's energy and effort to partner with private sector and private to partner with public sector is here. So we need to keep it up through the next administrations. And if we do, it's going to be a better world.
Dave, Katherine, thank you for your time. Thank you for your service. And it's always great to see the good guys have some of the best talent fighting all of this. And
is this a bad time to say go blue for Defender versus red for Auburn?
Orange.
Okay.
Orange. You can say red. We don't care about that. That's Roll Tide. So
that's fun. No, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate
you.
Thanks, Frank.
Awesome. Thank you
Good
both.
stuff.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Cyber Focus. If you liked what you heard, please consider subscribing. Your ratings and reviews help us reach more listeners. Drop us a line if you have any ideas in terms of topics, themes, or individuals you'd like for us to host. Until next time, stay safe, stay informed, and stay curious.